Thank you so much for being here. I must begin just by thanking you all for the tremendous encouragement that you've been giving. This will be our 11th class now. We've got at least 3 or 4 more to go before we even get to Revelation. In Matthew 24, Jesus is gazing down upon the Temple Mount and the rest of the city from the Mount of Olives. While you're reading Matthew chapter 24, you need to consider how many questions were asked in the 3rd verse when the disciples approached Jesus. They asked him some number of questions. What is that number of questions? Depending on how many you think are there, it will then color all your thinking throughout the rest of the chapters. You want to make sure you get that right, or you're going to be real wrong. And then, how many topics are involved? However many questions they ask, are the disciples asking about more than one thing? If they're asking about more than one thing, then more than one topic would be involved. We'll have to determine how many topics are being discussed in Matthew chapter 24. And most importantly, we need to figure out where the transitions are, where Jesus changes from discussing this topic to that topic to the next topic. So please be thinking about that very consciously. Every single verse that you're reading in Matthew chapter 24, we're going to go back and look at Malachi very briefly again from the last video's lesson. So let us start with Malachi 3:1, which says, "I'm going to send my messenger. He will clear the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight is coming," says Yahweh to Malachi, who wrote it down and kept this then via the letter in front of the Jews for 400 years before the messenger, who is John the Baptist, had completed his work and cleared the way for me, God, in the person of Emmanuel, God with us. The Lord whom they sought. Then he's going to come to his temple at some point, and the messenger of the covenant, who is this Lord whom you seek coming to his temple. So now we got 2 messengers. First one's John, second one's Jesus. This one in whom you delight is coming, says Yahweh. Now skipping in chapter 3 to verses 12 and then 16 and 17, all the nations will call you blessed. This messenger of the covenant, this Lord who is me, all the nations are going to call blessed, and the people, the Jews also, who brought that Messiah into the world, and of course are the first people, the first fruits to accept him. It says also, "You Jews shall be a delightful land," says Yahweh of hosts. And a book of remembrance was written for those who fear Yahweh, Jews in the 1st century, and esteem his name. They'll be mine, says Yahweh, on the day I prepare my own possession. Now, I didn't focus on that particular phrase quite so much in the first presentation, but you know, we have a book of remembrance for those who fear Yahweh, but there's also the preparation of another possession for the Lord. Well, I take that to be the Christians. He, in this same time frame, is dealing with the Jews who have been God's people for centuries, but now there's going to be this new possession as well. And he says, "Then I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him." So I've been pointing out in Daniel, other prophets, and now in Malachi that we're going to be certainly seeing it in Matthew, that some of these people are going to be spared, rescued, saved. A number of different terms are used, and we have to determine whether or not this is eternal salvation at the end of the universe and final judgment and going to heaven, or if this possession's preparation and their sparing take place at some other very previous time. We then move to Malachi chapter 4. It's only got 6 verses as the book comes to a close. "The day is coming, burning like a furnace. Every evildoer will be chaff." We saw that figure in Matthew 3 and John the Baptist. "And the day that is coming will set them ablaze," says Yahweh of hosts, "so that it will leave them neither root nor branch." In the previous prophets we've studied several weeks now, in Malachi, something dreadful, terrible is coming for the Jews. And when it's over, there will be neither root nor branch left for those Jews. In other words, the new possession will be the only possession and will replace the first possession. This possession that God now has is not the Jews as his chosen people, but the Christians. The Jews will have neither root nor branch. When did that happen? What's the time frame? Well, you remember Daniel 12, another short chapter. This prophecy we're going to look now just at verses 1 and 7. "There will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time, and at that time your people." Now he's talking to Daniel. Daniel, your people. The only conceivable people that could be Daniel's people are the Jews, the Jewish people. Your people, Daniel, everyone who is found written in the book will be rescued. Well, we just saw the book of remembrance. Here it is in Daniel chapter 12 also, and these people are going to be rescued somehow, eternally End of the planet rescued, from final judgment, or rescued at another time? Well, he continues in Daniel's last verses. As soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, well, they're not going to have root or branch. And when the power of the holy people, the Jewish people, those first people of God, is completely shattered, then all these events will be completed. Daniel 12:7. So in our summary of Malachi 3 and 4, we're finding out in Isaiah and other prophets, and most prodigiously in Malachi's last two chapters, that John is coming under the figure of Elijah in Malachi, which I'm just summarizing tonight, so we didn't read it tonight, but John is that Elijah that was coming. This will be followed by Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, me, the messenger of the covenant. This is followed in rapid succession, brethren, not with a 2,000-year gap, by judgment. Okay, so in this summary, though, of chapters 3 and 4, when the judgment's over, the saints have been rescued, saved, spared. They were written in the book, and they're still on the earth. They're skipping about like calves and treading these others who were destroyed like ashes under their feet. The Jews have neither root nor branch, but this new possession goes right on here on the surface of the earth. Last, we looked at Matthew chapter 10. Beware of men. They'll hand you over to courts and scourge you in the synagogues, Jesus tells the apostles. You'll even be brought before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them and the Gentiles. But when they hand you over, do not worry about how or what to speak. It will be given you in that hour what to say. It's not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. You'll be hated by all because of my name, but the one who has endured to the end. While miracles are still on the earth, miracles ended 2,000 years ago. Divine inspiration ended when we got the last book of the New Testament. These people are enduring to an end and will be saved in the time frame when we still have miracles, which ended 2,000 years ago. And in case we're missing that point, he then says, whenever they persecute you in one city, flee to the next. For I say you will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. The Son of Man is coming at some end, and when that end takes place, the Jews will not have root or branch. The new possession will go marching right on, treading them, the first possession, under their feet as ashes. And it's all going to take place before these living apostles, in that one and only physical lifetime that they had, could finish preaching the gospel there in the early part of the first century in the cities of Israel. Everything points to all of these endings and distresses and tribulations and John, Jesus, and judgment as being fulfilled in the first century. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? The Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. Truly I say, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So this must be in the first century, in the generation that he's talking to, before all of those people would pass away sometime in the relatively near future, the next few decades, the standard lifetime of a man. The Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and at that time he's going to repay every man, that is, every man in the purview of the discussion, every man that Jesus is talking about in these passages. These people at that time will be repaid, everyone according to their deeds. Some will be rescued, most will not. Some will be ashes, trodden underfoot. A minority will not. They'll be rescued. They'll be saved. All of it happens in that generation. But we need to talk about the four words. The translators, I believe, have done a tremendous disservice to us in four words. It is essential, I believe, to get right in our minds what Jesus was actually talking about that would take place before the majority or all of his listeners had died. He's talking about saving a life and losing a life in that 25th verse, and then profiting the whole world. What would it mean if you forfeit your soul? What would you give in exchange for your soul in the 26th verse? Now, what I think is just a terrible failure on the translator's part is that those four words are one word in Greek, that is the Greek word psychen, but they have chosen to take four words in two adjoining verses. Four words that are identical, same root word, and then they've translated it in most English translations with two words that in our English minds are radically different. The difference between my life and my soul in Americanese, and has been the case for centuries. several of them now in U.S. history and in English history, going back to the King James Version, where this mistake was first made. The idea of life and soul are totally different in our minds, but Jesus only used one word. And it's just wrong to have two different English words that represent tremendously different ideas in our minds when Jesus didn't change words. He used only one. Now it's important for us, to understand this is quite a study. I've gone hours working on this. I know it's a big study. The popular translations have misled us. It's life, and there were some of those people there in that same life who would not taste death. They wouldn't lose that life until they saw the Son of Man coming in the glory of his Father and in his kingdom with his angels to repay every man according to his deeds. Now let's look at Luke 4, verse 13 to 21, at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry here. When the devil finished every temptation, he left him until an opportune time, and Jesus came to Nazareth. He entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read. The book of Isaiah was handed to him. He found the place where it was written. Now we're in Luke 4:18. The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the favorable year of Yahweh. Now verse 20, he closed the book. The eyes of all were fixed on him, and he said, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." So they're sitting there in a synagogue on a Saturday in Nazareth, right after Jesus came out of the wilderness of Judea, having passed all of Satan's tests, and he read in Isaiah 61, "The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the favorable year of Yahweh." And then he shut down and said, "This day the scripture's been fulfilled in your hearing." Here's Paul Harvey's rest of the story again. Now Jesus is fulfilling the passage, and so he's proclaiming the favorable year of the Lord and a lot of good stuff. The gospel, freedom, eyesight back, no oppression. That's great, the beginning of Jesus' ministry. But here's what he's quoting. It's Isaiah 61, the first 3 verses, where it says, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because Yahweh has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to captives, freedom to prisoners." And verse 2 says, "To proclaim the favorable year of Yahweh." And at that point, Jesus closed Isaiah 61 and did not read the rest of verse 2, which says, "And the day of vengeance of our God." Well, I wonder why he closed the book in Nazareth at the very beginning of his ministry on the favorable year and said, "This day that much is fulfilled in your hearing." Because, brethren, he fulfilled all the rest of this chapter too, but each in its order, and the day of vengeance in the preaching of Jesus that's going to come later in his ministry. And we studied it a lot, didn't we, in previous lessons? Last week, I think it was, we looked at Matthew 8. We looked at Matthew 10, we looked at Matthew 13, we looked at Matthew 16, we looked at Matthew 22, and in all those places, what was Jesus proclaiming? Vengeance, vengeance. Inescapable vengeance was coming. Inescapable in the sense that you can't stop its coming, but you could escape. You could be saved. You might not lose your life if you gave up one life. You could maintain the other. Keep thinking about it. When the day of vengeance of our God comes, and there's so much more, and this is so cool now, watch this, verses 4 through 15 now in Isaiah 61. Let's just keep reading. "They will repair the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. Strangers," I believe refers to Gentiles, "will stand and pasture your flocks, and foreigners, Gentiles again, will be your farmers and your vine dressers." Verse 6, "But you'll be called the priests of Yahweh. You'll be spoken of as ministers of our God. You'll eat the wealth of nations. Look for that in Revelation. And in their riches you will boast. Look for that in Revelation. I, Yahweh, love justice. I hate robbery and the burnt offering. Look for that to be suspended in Daniel and the book of Revelation. And I will faithfully give them their recompense. Here comes the judgment, every man repaid. Son of Man came in his glory before you guys die with his angels. Make an everlasting covenant. Malachi is the messenger of the covenant. Then their offspring will be known among the nations. Nations means Gentiles, and their descendants in the midst of the peoples. Now this is really fun. You've got strangers, foreigners, nations, and peoples, and those 4 different words in Isaiah 61, 4 to 15 are 4 different ways of seeing non-Jews. Gentiles, that mystery we talked about last video. Then it says, with these repairing of the ruined cities, he has clothed me with garments of salvation. He has wrapped me with a robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decks himself with a garland, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. So, brethren, as Isaiah 61 goes on, and I've got an Isaiah class from Cobber Road you can hunt down too. I think I did some pretty good work in there, taught the book whole way through, pointed some of these things out on the way I did. But look at this, repairing of the ruined cities. Just for fun, remember the bridegroom and the wedding, the feast that's coming when we get into Revelation. But let's just pursue these ruined cities being repaired and rebuilt by looking at Amos chapter 9. Hosea, Amos, Isaiah, and Micah all preached at exactly the same time. Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, and Micah were contemporary men. They may have shaken each other's hands. Here's Amos 9:11-15. In that day, whatever that day is we're talking about, I will raise up the fallen booth of David and wall up its breaches. I'll also raise up its ruins and rebuild it. That's exactly what Isaiah was saying, as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations who are called by my name, declares Yahweh, who does this. Also, I will restore the captivity of my people Israel, and they will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. Now, our big question, of course, is, are we talking about putting stone on stone? Do these 2 passages, Isaiah 61 and Amos 9, in all this rebuilding imagery, mean that Christians are going to live in a physical city? Number Acts 15:14-18 gives us the inspired interpretation of the imagery. It fulfills, Acts 15 does, both Isaiah 61 and Amos 9. Acts 15:14. Simeon has related how God first concerned himself about taking from among the Gentiles a people for his name. You remember Acts 15 and what they were wrangling over and all the problems they were having? How do we treat the Gentiles? Do they have to keep the law? Must they be circumcised? Simeon Peter has related how God first concerned himself about taking from among the Gentiles a people for his name. With this, the words of the prophets agree, just as it's written. And he quotes Amos 9, after these things, I'll return and rebuild the tabernacle of David, which has fallen. I'll rebuild its ruins and restore it so that the rest of mankind may seek Yahweh and all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who makes these things known from long ago. So now I know that this rebuilding imagery means that there's going to be a new people who are the temple of God. There's going to be a new people who are the tabernacle of God, that not just Jews but the Gentiles are going to be welcome in the kingdom of God. So when we do all this rebuilding and restoring, when we do all of this repairing that Isaiah 61, which Jesus didn't read all of when he started his ministry, all of that imagery is about first century events when the new possession comes online and glory, dominion, and kingdom comes to Jesus, Emmanuel, the messenger of the covenant. And we get a whole new, in this case, city. It's a new city, but it's about people, Jews and Gentiles. Now here we go. What's the time? Matthew 24 actually starts in Matthew 21, if you ask me. Well, Jesus is coming to his temple in this last week, and he's got business on his mind. That tide, has been going out, and that wave has been growing, and now it's crashing down on Jerusalem in the verbiage of Jesus, and the actuality of what he's prophesying is going to be more devastating than an actual 500-foot tsunami. So if you'll start in 21 and just start reading 21, 22, 23, 24, and see if you don't find the intensity rising. See if now, as we're getting into the last week of Jesus' life on this earth and how he's wrestling with those scribes and Pharisees, if the tension levels aren't really stacking up enough that murder enters the minds of the most powerful people in the nation. I'm going to do is pick up the very tail end of that thread tonight in Matthew 22, verse 41. How many questions were asked in Matthew 24:3? They are the direct result of what we're about to read. How many topics are involved in the minds of the men who ask those questions? They are a direct result of what we are about to read. Matthew 22:41-46. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question. What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? And they said to him, the son of David. They knew the Old Testament prophets. And he said to them, "Then how does David in the Spirit call him Lord, saying, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies beneath your feet'? If David then calls him Lord, how is he his son?" Well, there's a conundrum for you. A son is always lesser than his father. The son gives obeisance and honor to his father. The son should always be in humble submission to his father. So how can the Lord say to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I put your enemies beneath your feet"? If David calls him Lord, how is he his son? No one was able to answer him a word, nor did anyone dare from that day on to ask him another question. So what do you think? Who is he? Well, he's the son of David. Well, how can David call his son Lord? Because this Lord will sit at the right hand of God and put his enemies under his feet. Luke 19, slay them in my presence. Matthew last week, burn their city down. Immediately we go to Matthew 23. But woe to you, number one of 8 formulative condemnations. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from men, for you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, here's number 2, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you devour widows' houses, even while for a pretense you make long prayers. Therefore you shall receive greater condemnation. Number 3, verse 15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you travel about on sea and land to make one proselyte. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of Gehenna as yourselves. Verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, that's nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he's obligated. You fools and blind men. Which is more important, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, you say, that's nothing. But whoever swears by the offering upon it, he's obligated. You blind men, which is more important, the offering or the altar that sanctifies the offering? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. He who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Verse 23, woe to you. Number 5, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Number 6, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and of the dish, so that the outside of it may become clean also. Number 7, formula condemnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Number 8 and final, verse 29. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous and say, if we had been living in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partners with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Consequently, you bear witness against yourselves that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up, then, the measure of the guilt of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how shall you escape the sentence of Gehenna? Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you'll kill and crucify, and some you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that upon you may fall all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. If I were to ask you, what's the topic and where did he transition to something else in Matthew 23? Would anybody say, oh, well, Jesus is talking about 6 different things and it's separated by 2,000 years? Nobody does that. We know exactly who he's talking to. We know who he's condemning. The limp-wristed, milk-a-toast kind of way that most preachers would read this dismisses the whole point. Jesus is enraged and he's ready. He has unloaded both barrels and the whole 9 yards, and then every ordinance up to and including fishable materials on these guys in Matthew 23. Can you imagine if you were there, how that audience was? Wow. Now, brethren, look at the next verse. 7 times he says, woe to them. In verse 14, he says they'll receive a greater condemnation. In verse 15, he calls them sons of Gehenna. In 33, he says the sentence of Gehenna is inescapable for them. In 34, he says upon them falls all the righteous blood on earth. Now we read on. Verse 36, truly I say to you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Well, I wonder what that means. 2,000 years from now, end of the world. Matthew 24:1. Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he answered and said to them, do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here shall be left upon another, which will not be torn down. He's come to his temple, and it's time to really preach the day of vengeance, the favorable year. That's when I start my ministry. Now I'm going to fulfill the rest of Isaiah and tell you about this day of vengeance. What does the last word in verse 3 represent? Let's start in verse 3 again. They have just pointed at the temple. He has said, do you not see all these things? Truly, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down. They then went down a steep embankment up the other one, and in verse 3, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus will answer however many questions they asked on however many topics that he introduced on the Temple Mount in the last couple of chapters, and particularly at the end of this 23rd. Matthew 23:35 and down to the end of chapter 23, upon you, who was he talking to? Who has he excoriated for the last 34 verses? Upon you may fall all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. Now he accuses them of murder to their faces, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. They're on the Temple Mount, and he's accusing these people of murder. And if it's going to be done there by the altar, then it has to be priests who are involved, not just the scribes and Pharisees. Then he tells them something. To my knowledge, everybody agrees. Matthew 23:36 is talking about the fall of Jerusalem in their generation, culminating in September of 70 AD, when the temple was burnt to the ground and then every stone was taken off the other. We just all say, well, that generation was going to have to pay for what they did, and they did, because 40 years, almost to the day that Jesus is talking right here, the temple finally came down. That's what it's talking about. In that generation before the last of those people died. And I have not only the time frame in 36, but I have the location spelled out in 37, Jerusalem. Twice. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. I have the time and the place. It can't be anything else. I'm not deceived by premillennialism in chapter 23, so I don't have to insert a millennium and a rebuilt temple and all that in Matthew 23 like the premillennialists will do later, but not here. It's great. Everybody, we know what verse 36 means. Now go read chapter 24. It's in Jerusalem. In 38, he says, your house is being left to you desolate, and no heavier, more terrifying, more awful, more horrifying, more appalling words have ever been uttered in prophecy than those, you Jews, you leaders of the Jews, your house will be left to you desolate. If you can remember anything about Daniel, you might remember that there's an abomination of desolation coming. Now, there are 2 ways to understand the word house, and I believe both are emphatically true and in Jesus' mind at this time. House can refer to the temple, of course, and does. When Jesus says in verse 2, after they pointed at the temple in verse 1, do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here shall be left upon another that will not be torn down. Matthew 24:1-2. Well, clearly he's talking about the temple. It's only the temple that has stones to be taken down in this generation, Jerusalem, before you guys die, when the great and terrible day of the Lord comes from Malachi. But house can also be used of the house of Israel, and it's appropriate to use it that way. The Bible would use it that way. This then would refer to the people, the nation, the chosen people of God. They're unanswerable by the people who so call themselves Jews today. They're absolutely unanswerable because they don't have root or branch now, do they? No, they don't. Not since 70 AD. Now I'll leave you with all of that. Matthew 23:36. When you answer the question, the answer is this generation. The house of Israel, in both senses, will be left desolate. They're gone. Now, brethren, what other time frame can you pick for that? There is none. There is none possible. Thank you for watching and listening. I love reading your comments. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next class.